Salutations, people of the internet, welcome to the database. One of my biggest regrets as a kid in the early 2000s is me not having a very strong Game Boy Advance library. While I was cleaning my room and organizing my video game shelf, I stumbled upon my own Game Boy Advance collection, and I immediately got sad because of how small and mediocre my collection was. Majority of the games I owned are licensed games. Some are actually good, at least compared to like SpongeBob SquarePants the movie game and SpongeBob Atlantis SquarePantis. Those I enjoy. I even have a competent kart racing game featuring the cast of some of the hit Cartoon Network characters back in the day. Then I have mid to shit games like Power Rangers SPD or Sonic Genesis. Now that I mention it, Sonic had a boatload of games on the Game Boy Advance too, aside from this garbage. And I feel so mad at myself that I missed out on buying cartridges of these games. I mean, I'm still young, and I'm sure there are used copies of these Sonic Game Boy Advance games out there, but still. That leads me to discussing Sonic's debut game on the Game Boy Advance, Sonic Advance. Released the same year as Sonic Adventure 2 Battle on the GameCube, this game along with Sonic Advance marks Sonic's debut as a third-party game, making his debut on not just any non-Sega console and handheld, but a Nintendo one. See, back in the early 90s, Nintendo and Sega used to really hate each other's guts, and compare the video game wars between Microsoft's Xbox and Sony's PlayStation to this rivalry, is like comparing WrestleMania X7 to X8. Sure, they're both similar, but you know people are gonna remember one event than the other. So back then, this was a real shocker to see Sonic sharing the same library with several Mario titles on the same platform. Nowadays, it's a common thing to see Sonic games on Nintendo platforms. I mean, look at my Sonic collection on the Wii and Switch for example. But this occurrence in a strange way feels special. Like seeing a former TNA wrestler in WWE. Why the sudden references to pro wrestling all of a sudden anyway? Seeing as I now capture Game Boy games on my Wii, what better way to test that out than play a Game Boy Advance game? God, I love my homebrewed Wii. And I love my Wii in general. Maybe I'll do a console retrospective on it, who knows. Let's dive into Sonic's first game on the Nintendo handheld that is not a bootleg. This is Sonic Advance on the Game Boy Advance. But first, one thing I want to mention on how I'm capturing footage of this game on my Wii. The Wii's video output is 480p. However, to capture footage for all the games on my Wii, I had to use a Wii 2 HD adapter that uses a Wii's AVI port and let the Wii play in a slightly higher video quality and opens the Wii's capabilities of playing games in 16:9 aspect ratio. I use a MGBA emulator to play all my Game Boy ROMs and one zoom adjustment where the game fits the whole screen, and this is the best method I got to playing and capturing Sonic Advance. There isn't really a story for Sonic Advance, just Eggman wanting to use the Chaos Emeralds to take over the world. So Sonic and his friends, with the playable debut of Amy Rose, set out to stop the Egg Human once again across 7 zones. When I mention playable debut, I'm talking in a 2D setting, because years prior, she is seen playable in many Sonic spin-offs like Sonic the Fighters, Sonic R, and in the 3D space, she was given her own story campaign in Sonic Adventure in 1998. In terms of her playstyle in Sonic Advance, it's kinda similar to how she was played in Sonic Adventure as well. I talked about Amy's gameplay before on my software update video on Sonic Origins, when they released her as a playable character in the Origins Plus DLC. And while Amy Rose in Sonic Origins serves as an interpretation for how she would play in the 16-bit Genesis Sonic game setting, her moveset in Sonic Advance is an interpretation of how they could bring her moves from Sonic Adventure to a 2D setting. She doesn't curl into a ball, whether for a spin dash or hopping onto badniks. Instead, if players hold down on the D-pad, she does this hop skip that lets her get a small boost of forward momentum. And when attacking badniks, the only way she could do so is with her Pico Pico hammer. In mid-air, this can be done after pressing the jump button and action button afterwards. She can also use her hammer while she's idle and close to an enemy as well. If the players master her unique moveset well enough, this makes Amy's campaign in Sonic Advance a whole new and different experience compared to the main 3 boys that play just as the same as their Genesis games. Her approach in most stages requires a lot of thought to put into them. When's the best time to use a hop skip for an increase of momentum, positioning herself to use a hammer without getting hit, and seeing as players have to remind themselves that she can't spin dash or hop onto badniks into a ball. This experience feels way better and interesting to play as Amy in than in Sonic Origins. As for the main 3 members of Team Sonic, there isn't anything I could say about them without repeating myself from covering other 2D Sonic games. Except for one thing is interesting. When making a new generation of 2D Sonic games on new gen hardware, they needed to make Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles feel familiar to their 16-bit roots, while also adding something new to them that make them fresh. That makes them feel like a evolutionary step to the franchise's direction in the adventure era of Sonic games. Example here, when playing as Sonic, he's gifted with a forward or backward mid-air dash that is useful when gaining a short boost of momentum for those platforms he could reach. Tails is given his tail swipe attack, and Knuckles is given his 3-hit combo. Both movesets are from Sonic Adventure. Sonic has his Insta-Shield ability from Sonic 3K, and speaking of the shields, these shields are taken from Sonic Adventures 1 and 2, meaning the elemental shield from 3K didn't come back. The electric shield is here, but it only attracts nearby rings and not give Sonic a double jump. For each zone in Sonic Advance, they follow the traditional format laid out in the 16-bit games. 2 acts per zone with a boss fight against Eggman in the 2nd act. Neo Green Hill Zone is your first standard level for a Sonic game. It gives the players a feel for each of the main characters, and the boss fight is a giant hammer with an easy pattern to learn. This is also the first zone to introduce the impossible to find on your first playthrough special rings that lead you to special stages for a Chaos Emerald. These stages feature these diving sections where you need to collect a set amount of rings to nab a Chaos Emerald, which is now limited to their own spring. They give off the illusion of 3D space yet use 2D sprites, and it can make collecting rings very disorienting, to the point where you aren't guaranteed to touch the rings at the right position. And if you fail these special stages, not only you respawn close to the spring, but you can never retry them again, so you only get one shot at these special stages per campaign run, unless you reset the console. So yeah, you're better off resetting your Game Boy Advance. Start back at the stage you left off that has the Chaos Emerald over again. Thankfully, the Chaos Emerald count in this game, no matter which character you play, is the same for all of them. So if you happen to fail the special stage as Sonic, maybe you could try again as Tails, Knuckles, or Amy, instead of resetting your handheld countless times, so I guess that's nice. Now for the other stages. Secret Base Zone is next, and this base isn't so secret as Eggman laid it out to be. It's a fun zone with probably one of the best OST tracks in Sonic Advance. All of the music has to be compressed to fit in the GBA cartridges, but the music composition is good enough where it doesn't really sound so compressed while listening to it, even with earbuds. Hope you have a shield for this boss fight though. Whenever Eggman launches himself in mid-air, that shaking ground also gives you damage, and you have no idea where he's gonna land. Casino Paradise Zone. When it comes to finding the special stage spring for this zone, you better make sure you're staying on the top portion of the stage, cause there is no way in hell that you'll find a special stage anywhere else, not even when you bumper yourself to the bottom. Also, the Eggman boss fight here can take a while, but if you stay in the bottom middle portion of the fight and time your attack, you'll be fine. And this is probably where I stopped playing Sonic Advance a bunch of times. Ice Mountain Zone, for one reason: the Eggman boss fight. I said earlier that the boss fight in Casino Paradise can take a while, but this boss fight can take ages to finish. especially when you have to deal with the amount of air you have left underwater. The icicle patterns are randomized, meaning you have no idea when and where to hop on top of them. Sometimes the icicles hit you depending on your positioning, and you're lucky if you can manage to hit them once or twice per icicle. As for the stage itself, well, it's actually okay. It's this game's water stage. However, unlike the boss fight, the water portions are never really a problem, which is so strange. Next is Sky Sanctuary Zone from Sonic 3K, only entirely different in terms of its level design compared to the original, ending with a boss battle against a Knuckles doppelganger, who turns out to be Robo Knuckles in disguise. And good lord, these missile barrages Robo Knuckles launches at you are way too intense for its own good, though thankfully it's all good and easy from here on out. I spoke too soon because Egg Rocket Zone is next, and I hate these hit detection on these spikes and enemy placements. This is a unique zone because rather than having your timer counting upwards like normal, the timer counts down as you need to work your way up to the top of the rocket. There are checkpoints in between each section of the rocket that crumbles down each time you climb up. Don't even think about getting the time bonus for the stage, cause this is probably the longest 2D Sonic stage I have ever played through. Now we're at the last traditional Sonic stage in the game, Cosmic Angel Zone. And much like Egg Rocket Zone, I hate the enemies in this stage too. Both Egg Rocket and Cosmic Angel Zone are lumped together as the game's 6th zone, which on paper it kinda makes the game very short. But getting all the Chaos Emeralds and knowing how long these last 2 zones are in length, I guess this makes the game worth the whatever price value it was back in 2002. Not to mention, while you can get all 7 Chaos Emeralds at either one of the 4 main playable characters, you have to play as all 4 characters to get the secret Supersonic boss fight. This is done by having Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy go through all the same 7 zones and beating the final bosses in the final X zone, going back to X zone again as Sonic to unlock the pathway to the true final zone. This is all done in order to get the good ending, and people keep saying the repeated padding in Sonic Heroes is bad. Can I talk about the final boss fights as well? Cause the 2 of these fights are such a pain to get through if you're trying to beat it without losing any rings. The Egg Snake in Cosmic Angel is a tricky one, as you not only have to avoid these energy spears that can harm you, but you need the right amount of force to flip Eggman over to hit him, otherwise it won't flip at all. As for the bosses in X Zone, there's 3. 2 of them are callbacks to the classic 16-bit Sonic games, mainly Sonic's 1 and 2, the Wrecking Ball from Green Hill Zone, and the Drillmobile from Emerald Hill Zone. Both have lesser hit points compared to the original, but the Egg X-Mech is another boss fight that pisses me off while keeping all my rings. The timing to hit Eggman is very small, and the attack patterns are randomized. Unless you have max amount of extra lives going into this fight, prepare to see a ton of game over screens. And finally, the Super Egg Robot in the Moon Zone is shockingly cool enough, but not great either. It's not as iconic as a Doomsday Zone in Sonic 3K, that's for sure, and its attack patterns are readable but not challenging enough. Plus you'll end up with enough rings no matter how long you take in this boss fight. You just ram Sonic into the mech's head enough times to win, ending the main campaign of Sonic Advance. Yeah, you thought I was gonna skim over the Chow Garden in this game? In Sonic Advance, there's this side content you can mess around on called the Chow Garden. Here, you can get to raise your very own Chow in a Tamagotchi-like gameplay scenario. You can feed your Chow fruits, have it play some of the toys you bought with rings you collected from the main campaign, and play a couple of minigames to earn small amount of rings as well. It's just rock, paper, scissors and the card memorizing games, but with a pretty neat twist that rewards you with rings. And seeing as Sonic Advance came out the same year as Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, players can also link their Chow to the game and maybe swap them over to Chows they have there as well. You can even raise them enough to participate in races and such. I'll go over more details about the Chow Garden when I review the first 2 Sonic Adventure games in separate videos. I'm giving Sonic Advance on the Game Boy Advance a solid A rank. It's a great evolutionary step when it comes to bringing Sonic into the next generation of 2D platforming. It carries some of the moves introduced in the 3D Sonic Adventure games and perfectly translate them into 2D. Playing as Amy might take some time for players to get used to, if they aren't familiar with her playstyle in Sonic Adventure 1, but for the other 3 characters in the form of Team Sonic, it's familiar territory all around. The stages continue to be as memorable as the Genesis classics, with backing soundtracks that fit the level's style and aesthetic, despite all the bullcrap from the last 2 zones. Sure, on the surface it may not look as fast as the Genesis games, nor as fast as its sequels, but it gets the job done by translating what we know about Sonic into newer hardware. So when I get to reviewing Sonic Advance 2 and 3, I know for sure that there are things that can be improved upon, or at the very least give a new unique experience than its predecessors. It pushes the limits of the GBA can handle when it comes to showcasing Sonic's momentum-based platforming, and I know I've been comparing Advance to its Genesis counterparts, but in many ways it tried to improve on that formula as well, while also retaining its basis, which is what I've been trying to say throughout this entire video. As long as the experience keeps the momentum flowing, that's what you call a Sonic game in Advance. So what are your thoughts on Sonic Advance 1? Did you enjoy Team Sonic's transition into the Game Boy Advance? Let me know in the comments. Thumbs up the video if you like it, subscribe to the database, and follow me on social media as seen above. And don't worry, I'll cover the other 2 Sonic Advance games someday. I'm Christopher James, and I'll see you next time.
Game Boy Advance. Sonic is a superstar.